You haven't mentioned the caterpillar glass domes.
No, that's right. And around this same area, we've got this structure which I nicknamed the caterpillar. I think that was my name. I don't think I stole that off anybody. That's just what it reminded me of when I first looked at it. And it's got these regularly spaced segments in it. And it's about 1.3 miles long. What is this thing? Again, I've seen no explanation for this other than sand dunes. Everything is a sand dune to a planetary geologist that's looking at Mars, apparently, or an ice field or something, or some combination thereof. So what is this caterpillar thing? What are these covered craters?
Didn't Tom Van Flandern say that it's definitely reflecting light, so it's like see-through?
That was the tubes. That was another image that we've got. But yeah, there are these apparent tubes, which again other people have said are just dunes photographed with a particular lighting conditions, which makes them look like tubes. But Van Flandern disagreed, and he said that they were tubes.
Right.
So again, I don't know, but and we did cover that. I definitely know we covered that on the previous Rich Planet show that we did on this.
Right. Shall we move on to some spirit and opportunity? This is the landers photographs. So obviously we did a whole show all about questioning whether those photographs did in fact come from Mars or not, and there's doubt over that. If you watch show number 227, it'll put into context some of what we're going to say. So you've got, I think, with regards anything taken from the surface of Mars, in my opinion, you have to look at it with a very critical eye, in that it may have been taken not on Mars, may be totally artificial, could be, I would say, more likely from some remote part of the Earth. That's, in my opinion, where I think most of these images have come from. And I gave the motive in my lecture that they are probably investigating Mars in detail for further evidence of, such as the face of past civilizations. So I think it's been ring-fenced, and all we're getting is bullshit images. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I would tend to think, I tend to go along with you on that.
But there are a lot of anomalies in the rover and lander images, which you've highlighted in your book. I think some of which can be explained because they may not be from Mars, right? So do you want to start, Andrew? There's this one.
Yeah, you can start if you want. Just
one you've titled the Sphinx.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fairly, obscure one, but I was quite intrigued by the analysis that Richard Hoagland and Mike Barra had done on this image from the Pathfinder rover from 1997, where you've got, it superficially looks like a pile of rocks, but again, if you zoom in, you can sort of begin to see that it does maybe look like it could be a sphinx. And then they use this technique, as I recall, called surface resolution enhancement. And, it is a peculiar image when you look at it. Is it a sphinx? I wouldn't say I'm 100% convinced, but it is unusual. Would that, if it is on Earth, would that give us a clue to where this rover actually is? Is it just a picture of a set? I don't know. But again, it's an anomaly in the imagery. It doesn't fit, to me, very well with this idea of just random piles of rocks just lying about the place. It appears to look something other than that, whether it be on Mars or on Earth. Okay.
And the next image, you think looks like a handle?
Yeah, this is a peculiar image. I mean, even if it's on Earth, it reminded me of the handlebar of a bike. Something. It looks like a shiny piece of metal sticking out of the ground. And I forget what the explanation that they gave for this. I think it was meant to be one of these ventrifacts or something, but maybe that was the other one. But on Earth, as on Mars, often you can see knobs or projections on surfaces eroded by wind, particularly when a less erodible rock is on top. The rock on top of the projection is likely more resistant to wind erosion and protects the underlying rock from being eroded. The shiny surface suggests that this rock has a fine grain and is relatively hard. Hard, fine-grained rocks can be polished by the wind to form very smooth surfaces, while the surfaces not directly being eroded by wind may have a fine layer of reddish dust or rock weathering rind. The sandblasted surfaces may reveal the inherent rock colour and texture. this knob has a different type of rock at the end of the projection, and this rock may vary in composition, or the rock grain size may be smaller. But that's the whole point. If you look at that image, the thing that's sticking out doesn't look like rock.
Right.
It's very shiny.
Right, I see. Yeah, and there appear to be a lot of ventifacts in these images, which I argue is further evidence that they're just taken from the Earth. Because I don't think the Martian atmosphere is thick enough to create ventifacts like that on rock.
No, exactly. And all these techniques for erosion, like the one I read out, well, that relies on something which is analogous to what we've got on the Earth. But then again, they would claim that the wind speeds are much higher on Mars, even though the atmosphere is more rarefied. So, once you've got the right letters after your name to say these things, maybe you're just not, anybody else saying them is not going to be taken seriously.
Right. And squared off block.
Yeah, this was actually posted originally. I saw it originally on Zechariah Sitchin's site, where you've got some of these rocks lying around. It looks like a breeze block almost, concrete block. What is it? Is it a breeze block? Well, to me, it looks like it has more than one angle on it, more than one right angle on it. So there's something going on there.
Again, you've said that is this a large jar or vase with a handle? I would imagine the handle is alleged to be a ventifact.
Yeah.
So, same as my previous comment.
Right. Yeah, that's the one that's next.
I've seen this one before. This is people allege it looks like a skull.
Yes.
Again, I would say it's ventifacts. The two eye sockets are probably ventifacts. Okay.
Yeah. Again, there's some of these, which may be perfectly explainable, but I put some of them in just because they seem to be of interest. Couldn't see the obvious explanation, haven't picked up on an obvious explanation, but if anybody's got the obvious explanation, then please give it to me.
You've got a chapter on water on Mars, and we did discuss that when we were discussing the Mars rovers. We'll probably skip past that because I'm sick of mainstream talking about water on Mars.
Yeah.
It seems to me that it's just a filler that they can talk about Mars with, that is something relatively new. They don't have to admit that there's a face. Exactly,
and I think it works in two ways with the water. If you study the news releases, the pattern becomes clear that they've just repeated the same news.
Yeah, they keep saying
40
the same
years.
thing.
Yeah, and it's been 40. It literally has been 40 years now.
Yeah. And then they say, well, if we can confirm there's water, then we think that means a higher chance of life.
Exactly. So they give you this little bit about water, and
literally drip feeding you, but they're drip feeding you with disinformation.
Yes.
And you mentioned here the film The Martian.
Yes, and that was something, again, which was coordinated, the release of that was coordinated with a NASA announcement about water on Mars. And the guy that, I think it was Ridley Scott, he admitted in an article on Breitbart, and I've got the reference in the book, NASA told him they were going to release this information about discovering liquid water or whatever it was. And he said, I've known about it for about 3 months before they actually announced it.
Right.
And it's like they were using NASA to help promote his film. Is that the way we should be doing things in science research? To promote a science fiction film with Matt Damon? I leave people to form their own.
Yeah, and you also have a chapter on the experiments that the rovers and landers have conducted on the surface. And again, the same comments apply, that we don't really know where these experiments have taken place.
Exactly, and I mean, they can't really reveal the truth about them because either the rovers are on Earth or they're on Mars. If they're on Mars and they've discovered life there already, that they're snookered because, that was essentially discovered in 1976. They can't admit that now after all the chat since then. And if they're on Earth, they can't admit that either because, of what we've talked about in relation to that. So that's why they don't.
It's just
life
on Earth that they've found.
Yeah. You found life on Earth again, if that's where they are.
Okay, again, the vertebrae, the jury's out for me on that one. It could be ventifacts, but ventifacts on Earth.
Yeah.
And again, we've got the famous crinoid fossil that's total smoking gun, isn't it? The crinoid. There's no geologist who will disagree with you that that is a crinoid fossil. A crinoid, which is a creature which swims about the oceans of the earth. And there it is in NASA's images, right? And they haven't announced it. They haven't jumped up and down and had a party.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And I think the reason why they haven't done that is because it's an Earth crinoid that they've got in their archive, because it was taken on Earth.
Absolutely.
And this guy, Charles Schultz, he's obviously a clever guy. You know, all of the detailed study that he's done of the Mars images, but he's just basing all his research, in my opinion, on a flawed assumption.
I think you could be right. And he also, he used to work for aerospace. And I like Charles Schultz, and I've listened to him quite a bit. And I actually wrote to him a few years ago now, and I asked him about the dome, and he wasn't interested in the dome. He tried to write that off as nothing, you know. One thing, going back to the life issue, though, I don't think I have mentioned on Rich Planet particularly before, and I've got a chapter, or part of a chapter on this, was the analysis of the supposed images of trees from the orbiter. So we're talking about the orbiter images now, and there was this chap called Alan D. Moen, and he did this lengthy analysis of the images, and he basically concluded, and I showed this in the book, and it's his analysis, not mine, and the way he did this I thought was excellent, and he thinks he's found images of trees on Mars, and the trees are sort of indicated by the way that the shadows change between several images.
And what's the official explanation for those images, then, Andrew?
That they're just defrosting dunes and that sort of thing. There isn't an explanation because it's just shadows of dunes.
Right.
You know, he doesn't agree with that.
Right. So what's his background then? The guy who's done this analysis, is he a tree expert or is he an image expert?
I think he's got something to do with computer graphics or 3D modelling.
Right.
I can't remember what his background is. He did get one of his papers published in a journal, and I wrote to him a few years ago, because this book is really a consolidation of some of the stuff I've been sort of talking about for the last few years, and I wrote to him probably 8 or 9 years ago, and he responded saying that he was hoping to get NASA interested in his analysis, but they've just shown no interest in it.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, exactly. And he got some people to agree with him anonymously. Again, he did similar to what I did. He sent them images without any links or description, and he said, "Oh yeah, these do look like shadows of shrubs." And one of the geologists actually said that to him, and I've got that quote in the book. And then he of course sent them the image that it was from Mars, and they kind of went quiet, as you might expect.
So let's move off Mars now, then, Andrew, and go to some other celestial bodies. Or was there anything else you wanted to do?
No, I mean, people can go and look at the rest of the book. Again, we've covered some of it on Rich Planet. So let's move on. So
Phobos is a moon of Mars. Anything on there worthy of note?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this on an earlier Rich Planet program, but one of the things that I found while I was just putting this book together was that Phobos and Deimos are two of the moons of Mars, and they were only discovered, I think, in 1837, I think was 1887, and the peculiar thing is that if you go and look at Gulliver's Travels, the story Gulliver's Travels, which I forget the exact date that it was written years and years before. I think it was written in the 1600s, 1700s. It talks about Mars having two moons, and one of them goes round Mars in about 10 hours. And that's actually in the Gulliver's Travels story. So how did, I think it was Jonathan Swift that wrote it, how did he know that Mars had two moons before they would even be seen?
If you're going to make the story a bit more exotic than Earth, you're just going to add a moon, aren't you? You know, two moons. I wouldn't put that down.
But you've got to go and read the actual story.
Right, okay.
He got the orbital period right as well, or within a very small margin of error.
Right.
He said they were very close to Mars, and he also said something like they don't belong to Mars.
Right.
That's actually said in his story.
Okay.
And it was a capture. They tried to say it's a captured asteroid, but if you look at, but it's not. Phobos and Deimos cannot be captured. There's no way that Mars could have captured those moons. with Phobos, there's quite a lot of interesting information about it, and they tried to put out this story. This was done through Marina Popovich in the 1980s, that Phobos 2, this probe, had been shot down by a missile, as it approached Phobos. And that story isn't true. It was just, it may have crashed or gone off course, but the missile story is bogus, because if you look at the actual images, it's actually a glitch in the image, and you can see that.
Yeah.
And they also said that there's this weird shadow on the surface of Mars, when Phobos 2 was going around it. And that weird shadow was Phobos itself. And that's been photographed several times by Mars Global Surveyor and Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and the
So what's
European
the point?
probe.
Because I featured a program that aired on mainstream TV years ago.
That's right.
About this supposed alien craft which shot down the Russian mission, but it was a photographic artifact and a shadow of the moon. So it was a bullshit story.
Yeah.
Why would they must know that's a bullshit story, the Russians or whoever put it out. Why would they do that?
Well, it may have worked in different ways. I mean, they may have just put it out because they didn't know what the actual evidence was.
Right.
And it's a bit like how the 9/11 disinformation gets out. So there is a story there. So it may be, for example, that the bit about Phobos being a space station or a spaceship is actually true. And I have more to say that in the next interview we're going to do a little bit, which is something I came across which was quite unusual. But the actual shoot down story is false. That was just,
Right. So in other words, there is something that they're trying to keep covered up about Phobos, something perhaps very, very profound, and they'll put out silly stories like this
to make it look ridiculous.
Yeah. So that anything connected with Phobos, they'll just mention this story again.
And again, we've got some evidence there that the missile story can be debunked, which it can.
Yeah. So
that you can debunk the rest of the story by debunking the missile story.
Yeah.
So that I think is probably how that was done.
Right. And there is, well, as Buzz Aldrin claimed, he mentioned a monolith on Phobos in this TV interview he was
given.
He
did. And again, if you look at the images, he's right. There is a monolith on Phobos, and we covered this again on an earlier Rich Planet programme. So won't spend too much time on it here.
Do you think that's just a natural random piece of rock? Or?
Well, I mean, again, it could be, but if for example, I do think there's a high probability that Phobos is some type of space station, or it's not. It's a hollowed out moon or something. So if this thing's sticking through the surface, what is it? Is it a sensor of some kind? Is it some type of, exhaust system for getting rid of stuff, or an air exchanger or something? We don't have enough detail in the image to actually see what it is, but there is clearly something on the surface of Phobos which is much different in colour to the surrounding rock, and it's sticking up. But there was also a monolith discovered in Valles Marineris on the surface of Mars, and it's actually seen in image PSP 00934211725. I've got the links and everything in the book, and that definitely looks like a monolith. If you look at that, to me, that is a monolith.
Because it's thinner, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's on page, I'm now looking at the one...
177, is it?
So yeah, 177, that's right.
Looks like a gravestone.
It looks like a gravestone, yes, indeed. And I don't know the size of it, but again, it's probably like 5-10 metres. You could probably work it out if you look at the image resolution. I didn't work it out for the book, I should have perhaps. But I also discovered in that particular image there did seem to be some type of potential alignment between three objects, which nobody has pointed out before. They form a triangle, which looks to be an isosceles triangle to me, with a right angle perhaps. So that was somewhat unusual. But that monolith in Valles Marineris on the surface of Mars gets confused with the one on Phobos. So there's certainly a Daily Mail article which doesn't properly distinguish between the two. And there is another image which I've included in the book, and I don't know where that image has come from. I couldn't find it. It's at the top of page 173. And it actually came from an Italian website. I traced it back to that, and when I looked at the Italian website, that had a different image, and then that referred me to another image, and that was different as well. So that one that looks the most spectacular monolith, I couldn't actually trace the original image number for it. That is perhaps the most spectacular one, but I don't know where that came from. I don't have a reference for it. It was referenced in the Daily Mail, which isn't a reliable source, as we know, and then an Italian website, which also wasn't seemed to be that reliable. So
I just ask you, Andrew, what's your guess as to why Buzz Aldrin would mention that in it? Do you think he's just heard about it from a conspiracy website or from people who've analysed NASA images?
That is a tough one. I thought about that, and it obviously is throwing down some breadcrumbs for somebody to pick up. Was it that they wanted to get another Mars mission going and generate interest in that? Maybe, but it was a peculiar way to do it. So I really don't know why Buzz Aldrin mentioned that monolith in 2000 and 2009. It's a bit of a mystery to me, but he definitely did say it.
Yeah.
And I did analyse his interview with Alex Jones a little bit, but I couldn't really determine an exact reason as to why he would have mentioned that. You know, again, it's perhaps very similar to what they put in that Mission to Mars film with the astronauts going into the face and stuff. It was almost that type of thing. They're throwing you a few interesting morsels and seeing who bites. You know.
Right. Yeah, you have a whole chapter on Apollo, which we have covered previous, and also the Mars rovers.
Yes, I just covered that as a summary, really, to sort of put it in context. And put because obviously people that read this book, some of them will have seen Rich Planet and some won't. So I wanted them to have a summary of that, those that hadn't.
And you've got a section on the rings of Saturn.
Yes.
Are they not just natural particles of stones and rocks?
Yes. Well, again, that's what I'm assuming at the present time. What I did come across, and people had already mentioned to me, and I was already familiar with it, was this book by Norman Berggren, which was originally, I think, published in 1986, and it was called The Ringmakers of Saturn. And he goes to some lengths in there to try and illustrate, according to him, that from Voyager images, he could see these ships in the image, or evidence of these ships, which are 1,000 miles long, and they were involved in constructing the rings in some way. And I looked at these images. I haven't read the whole book, I'll certainly say that, hand on my heart. But the problem with Berggren's images was that they're not referenced. And he doesn't really exactly, he says that they were optically enlarged, but he doesn't give you any references for any of the images. He doesn't say which Voyager probe they're from, or, you know, whatever. And these are the earlier ones, which are lower resolution than Cassini. So I felt that Norman Berggren's work, whilst it was interesting, I don't think it really proved, and it certainly didn't prove anything to me. And this photo that he shows of a ring that's partially formed, I just think that's meaningless, because, you know, you can see other images from telescopes which shows a fully formed ring, and they're from Earth-based telescopes, so we're not relying on NASA, you know, because again, Saturn's another one. You get a good telescope, you can see the rings yourself, you know.
Oh yeah.
See them for yourself.
And we've covered Planet X in a previous show.
Right.
Is there anything that you would add to what we said? It was quite a while ago we did that.
Yeah, not particularly, I don't think. Again, I've had a few people writing to me saying that Planet X is just around the corner. We had another round of that recently. But I can't see how Planet X can be anywhere near because of the amateur astronomers. Even if Planet X is very dark, once it comes in front of some stars, you would see it through occultation, which is where, you know, an object passes in front of a star or another planet, and then you can see that star's not there, so that, you know, there's something there, and they've used that sort of technique to detect various objects. So I don't think there's any Planet X anywhere near the Earth, and, you know, people have been saying it now for at least 10 years on the internet, and we've not seen anything. So.
And there's a solar telescope, the SOHO.
Yes, we'll talk about that, but one thing I should mention before we get onto that is Iapetus, because I've got a whole chapter on Iapetus, which is a moon of Saturn, and that has got some very unusual features in it. I'd say that's, to me, got some of them. After Mars, Iapetus is the most unusual object in the solar system, and it's got hexagonal craters. It's got this equatorial wall, which is hundreds of miles long. No really good explanations for that. I looked at some of the research. I've quoted some of the research about how this wall was formed, according to them. And again, none of the scientific papers even allude to the fact that it might be a construction. They won't even go there, not even in a speculative manner. It's just not included in any of the scientific research, even though it does look like a wall. When you look at it, hundreds of miles long. But hopefully, people find the Iapetus chapter interesting as well. And again, that's mainly based on Richard Hoagland's research that he did on that. So the sort of one of the final chapters is the SOHO images from the sun, and I first became aware that there were some anomalies on SOHO, on the SOHO images around about 2005, I think it was 2004. And what SOHO? Well, SOHO is the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory. And you might think that it's run by NASA, but actually it's not. It is, well, it's partly run by NASA, but it's actually many of the instruments on SOHO are owned by the Naval Research Laboratory, which I found quite interesting when I found that out. What's the Navy sending probes to the sun for? But SOHO is this probe. It's in an orbit which is about 1 million miles from the Earth. It sits in one of the Lagrange points, which is where the gravitational force between the Earth and the sun is equal. And it takes pictures of the sun, and it's been there for over 20 years now. And it started picking up these objects, which to all intents and purposes look like flying saucers, or some of them do. And I saw this extraordinary image from 2005.
Which page? Have you got a page?
And I've got that image on page 220 of the book.
Mm-hmm.
And
would it not be like thousands of miles wide if that was a flying?
Well, we don't know how far away it is. This is the thing. It could be quite close to the probe, so it might not be very big, or it could be a long way off. And as you say, very large objects. So as far as I know, we don't have an indication of the distance. What we do have is an indication of an object which doesn't look like any of the planets.
It's not just an image anomaly.
Well, you could write it off as such, and of course NASA do. And if you look at their website, as I go into in the chapter, they have a whole debunk of these images. Right. And they show how they were produced, and you get this image glitch. Somebody then runs an image filter on it and a smoothing filter, and it ends up looking like a flying saucer or a UFO. Mm-hmm. They actually they dedicated a whole web page to this. But this actually brings me on to how this story developed for me.
Right, so they've come up with an explanation as to what that anomaly is. You've looked in detail at how it came to be, and you think it's a cover story. Again, it's a cover story. It must be. Because if you look at their explanation, it doesn't actually explain what the anomalies are. And they, for example, claim that the anomalies that have been highlighted don't have any dates on them. They don't have any image dates on them. Well, the one that I've got, and you can download it from their website, has the image dates on. And then, some years ago, it was about, I think probably even 10 years ago now, a chap in Germany wrote to me and he said, I've got loads of these SOHO images and I've done a big PowerPoint on them. And he sent it to me. And this guy, I think he's some type of engineer or a technician of some kind. So for some reason, the photographs that have been taken by this probe are just automatically put online for people to look at?
Yes, they don't seem to be filtered.
Right.
Yeah, they seem to be available. I think the reason why they don't really bother so much with them is that these images are not optical images. They're not showing you anything that's in real light. They're not seeing. They're showing you a part of the spectrum which is not non-visual. It's like either infrared or X-ray or ultraviolet or some of these areas. So they're less worried because people will see these images and not know what they're looking at. It's not like looking at images from the surface of the moon or Mars. They're characteristically very much different. But this NASA explanation talks about there being zillions of filters, that could produce these images. And the example they give is bogus. I break that down. And that's what this guy found, this German guy wrote to me because he found that image on my website and he sent me all his images, and he'd found loads of them, and he'd got all the dates on them, he'd done analysis of them, he'd looked at the way the CCD and the probe works, and how you get cosmic rays impacting and creating image anomalies. He'd gone through all of that. And I stole quite a few of his images for this book. I've got about 10 or 15 of them. But what happened was that this group called EuroSETI, they actually collected together some of these images, and they challenged NASA with them, and they created a display of these images, and this is back in 2003. And these images were shown at the National Space Centre in Leicester. This was just before, this was about 6 months before I got interested in the Disclosure Project, and so I just missed this expedition, this exhibition at the National Space Centre. So these weird UFO type looking images were shown by this group, EuroSETI, at a presentation in National Space Centre in Leicester, and a professor had to write a report about these images. I've got his name in the book, and
have you got the report?
Yeah, well, it was put into a press release, and so it's not very long. It was written up in a press release, sort of like press release come short report, I suppose you might call it. And what he said in this report is EuroSETI's basic claim is that these images reveal UFOs near to our sun. When asked why they are making these claims now, Mr. Murray said, "With what we've got from Soho satellite from our friends in Spain, it really seemed a good opportunity to show people we believe for the first time evidence of craft that can only be craft. They can't argue that it's anything else." But then what happens with this EuroSETI guy is he talks about they got these images from Soho and another satellite. But that's wrong. There isn't another satellite. What it is that there are two cameras on the same satellite. So that was wrong. And this EuroSETI group, I'd never heard of them before. I've never heard of them. Have you ever heard of EuroSETI? Never heard of them. This press release was attached to the Leicester Space Centre, as I said, but I found this press release posted on a website which was the cluster of Joint Science Operations Centre. That's where I found this press release. It wasn't on the Space Centre's website. And that's located at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory, which is itself part of the UK's Atomic Research Facility. So what are they doing sniffing around Soho images and this press release about these UFOs on Soho images? That was very peculiar to me. So basically there's something very fishy about this EuroSETI group, and to me it has all the hallmarks of an intelligence operation, that they're putting out a fake UFO interest group to highlight the Soho images that they state incorrect facts about them, like they came from Spain. No, they didn't come from Spain. They're on NASA's website
so
anyway.
All that's a cover.
Yeah, that's a cover.
And but we don't know what for.
We don't know exactly what for, but there's a little bit of an addendum to this. Because I put this in the book, I wrote that up, that this meeting, this release, this press release at the Leicester Space Centre was, some type of management operation, information management operation. And then I had a chap write to me. He actually came to one of your talks, and I spoke to him briefly at one of your talks, although not about this. And he read this book, and he said that I'd got the assessment dead right, because he went to that meeting in 2003. He went to this where this press release was shown, and he knew it was dodgy. He couldn't quite say why, but he knew that it was the way it was presented. The guy was quite nervous, and there was some air to it which didn't seem right.
Andrew's contact, who attended the EuroSETI presentation, is called Brian Thompson, and here is a summary of what he sent to Andrew. I would like also to share with you some thoughts on the Soho UFO story that you covered so well in Secrets in the Solar System, as my friend and I attended that lecture at the Leicester Space Centre. Suffice to say for now that you nailed it in your account, Andrew. The whole thing was dodgy, to say the least. I asked my best mate, Peter Milankov, if he'd liked to go with me, as he was someone that shared my interests in these topics. Pete was an open-minded skeptic. On arrival, it was our first visit, We found that as it was an evening presentation, most areas were closed off and we only had access to the forum and auditorium, which was like a small cinema. The first thing we noticed was that on every seat was a small piece of paper on which was printed a pretty thorough but otherwise standard disclaimer stating that the Leicester Space Centre in no way endorsed the material to be presented by EuroSETI at the presentation. I remember them being photocopied and cut by hand with scissors, giving the feeling of a somewhat hurriedly produced item. The other thing we noted was the audience, something I'm sure we all do at these kind of events. The presentation was given by two men, one of which was the indeed mysterious Mike Murray. I honestly can't remember for certain who the other guy was, but I suspect it was probably James Devereux, someone whose name always comes up in relation to Mike Murray and EuroSETI. Both Pete and I were struck with how nervous they both seemed, along with the salesman cheap suit impression they gave. As the presentation progressed and whenever people asked pertinent questions, it seemed to me that they were both quickly out of their depth and kept referring back to the presentation narrative. It left a palpable feeling of dissatisfaction in the room and added to the increasingly awkward vibe as the presentation continued. Considering the money that EuroSETI had thrown at this, it just didn't ring true to me, and both Pete and I smelled a rat, to say the least. By the end of the evening, to be honest, we were glad to leave and felt very disappointed by the whole event, as I think did others in attendance. Pete and I were left wondering about the veracity of the images we had been shown from Soho. When presented in the way they were, it was hard to take seriously. We were in little doubt about the veracity, or lack of it, of the presenters. In that way, I completely agree with your conclusions, as stated in Secrets in the Solar System, and looking back, it was certainly a case of job done, as you wrote. Now, Brian did further searches relating to EuroSETI and Mike Murray, and these tended to confirm the ill-defined nature of this group. One of the people that set it up was millionaire John Bannenberg. So we're not saying it's a UFO, but it's something that they've put out a bogus story to try and, disinform on it.
Yes. They've put it out to give them a way of dismissing the images as something which only silly people are interested in, basically. You know, we don't know if it's structured craft, but if you look at some of the images in detail, it does actually look like that. And look at the behaviour of some of them, it does look like structured craft. But it may not be that, it may be some other... But there is a cover-up, basically. They are covering something up.
So it could be a remnant of another civilization's technology, could be something that we've got.
I do recommend that people look at the Soho images. The chap that wrote to me originally in 2007 that had done the analysis, he felt from what he'd looked at, and he'd spent many, many hours looking at the images, that actually what was going on is something was trying to manipulate the sun. That these craft were actually involved with manipulating the sun in some way or scanning it.
And did he have an idea whether they belonged to us?
No, he didn't. He didn't really come along with that. In fact, if I can see if I can find his conclusion. These were his conclusions, not mine. The sun's activity is partly controlled by a higher intelligence we do not understand yet. The sun ejects massive amounts of energy, partly triggered by higher intelligence. NASA and ESA are involved in a massive cover-up and manipulate the images to hide the truth. NASA is using image processing software to rework the images, and coronal mass ejections might be the cause for global climate changes we are currently faced with. There's no doubt about that. Some of the effects shown can't be explained. CMEs seem to cause shock waves hitting the Soho satellite, which they probably would. But the interesting part was that he was saying that the higher intelligence was somehow maybe triggering these coronal mass ejections at certain points. Right. And that is an interesting concept to consider.